Today's guest is my daughter, Geeta. We talk about how we raised her with intention. Welcome to Richer Soul, Life Beyond Money, the last baby step. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and having it provide everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past doesn't dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. I help people live the life of their dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. You can see how on richersoul.com by looking under the coaching call tab to hear actual coaching sessions. If you haven't had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. It's simpler than you can imagine. You can also find all the show notes for this episode on the website. I have a monthly email, and you can sign up where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and also share a little wisdom that I learned during the month. I also share the most interesting articles on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. Check it out. Raising kids is hard. You need to be intentional and have goals for them. I want to be clear, expecting them to be what you want, say a doctor or an engineer, is not an appropriate goal because it's your goal, not theirs. Having well-connected and educated kids who are comfortable in their skin and can handle life is a much better goal. Figuring out how to achieve this requires you to have conversations with your kids and let them learn to choose and direct their life. The balance and the control of those choices shift over time as they grow and mature. Today, you're going to meet my daughter, and we're going to chat about the different experiences she'd had from a learning standpoint. We looked at her skills and what she liked, and have built onto that to provide her the skills and experiences to propel her forward in life. Let's face it, when was the last time you had to recite a history fact or use algebra in your daily life? Yes, they are important to know, but there are other skills that are far more important. Being able to speak, to write, to stand up in front of a room, to take charge, to lead, to manage your money, to fail and get back up, to build connections with other people, learn to build a network, how to think critically and solve problems. Many of these are not taught in school. Let's meet my daughter and see how it went. Welcome to Richer Soul, Geeta. It's great to have you join us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So we always start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your parents and school teach you about money?
I'd have to say that my school did not contribute very much to this conversation. I remember learning how to write a check in 3rd grade math class, but at that point in my life, it wasn't really applicable, and they didn't particularly teach me the skills that actually were applicable. My parents, on the other hand, they were very intentional about teaching me from a very young age what money was, why it's important, how to save it, how to spend it, and how to be intentional about making decisions with it. So when I was 5 years old, my parents started giving me an allowance. And they said, we're going to give this to you until you're 18 or until you go off to college, which is kind of where I'm about right now. But at 5 years old, I got $5. 2 of those dollars I had to save. 2 of those dollars I could spend, and then $1 went to church. So as I've grown up, saving and spending has been split half and half, and then some of my money has gone to church or to charity.
How did that teach you about money? getting the allowance and having money in your hand?
Having money in my hand was an interesting experience for a 5-year-old, I'd have to say. I know that before, when we used to go to a store, my parents would say, we're not going to buy anything. And I'd argue with them, like, why can't we buy something? I want this new Barbie doll, or I want this piece of chocolate, or I want this, or I want that. And once the allowance system was in place, I suddenly had my own money to spend. And if I had money, then I could spend it on chocolate or toys or whatever I wanted when I was 5 years old. All of a sudden, the arguments with my parents stopped because I didn't want to buy anything now that I was spending my money instead of their money.
That's a funny thing that happens when it becomes your money versus someone else's money. All of a sudden, your habits and attitudes change.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things that I noticed, and I'm sure that you noticed as well.
I did. Do you remember any of the times that you decided to buy something larger?
I do remember saving up for a couple of items. I remember saving with my brother for something. I don't remember what it was, but it probably cost about $100. We might have been saving for something like electronics related, or actually, you know what? The biggest one was probably a trampoline. Together, we saved $300 for trampoline when I was probably 7 or 8 years old. At 7 or 8 years old, I was getting $7 to $8 a week, but I could only spend 4 to 5 of those dollars at that point. So it took quite a while to save up for that trampoline. But I think that when we got the trampoline, we thought it was a lot more worth it because we had to put our own money into it, and we had spent so much time saving for it that it wasn't just something that was handed to us. Even though the money was from my parents, we still had to save, and we didn't spend money on other things that we kind of wanted to spend money on because we wanted to save for that larger item.
So valuable lessons. Hopefully they follow you through to adulthood.
Yeah, hopefully.
Any other money lessons you remember growing up?
The allowance system was probably the biggest one. And just saving that money. So that money wasn't being saved for college or for anything in the immediate future. I still haven't touched any of the money I've saved. And I probably won't be touching it for at least another 5 years, I'm assuming is what the original goal was. You're shrugging at me.
I don't know.
I'm not sure. I'm 18 right now. So when I originally started saving that money, I was told that it was for a house or for retirement or for something far, far into the future. So I think it's important to teach your kids from a young age that sometimes you should put money away for something that you don't know is coming. When you're 5 years old, you are not thinking about buying a house. You aren't thinking about getting married. You're thinking about, I want this piece of chocolate or I want this Barbie doll. And putting that money away teaches a habit of saving for the rest of that kid's life. And I know that that's helped me as I've grown up.
Let's talk a little bit about your schooling, because you kind of took an interesting path, right? You were in a private school, a very good private school that was kind of, kids were coming out at the top within our local community. And then things changed.
Yes, things did change. So just to elaborate on that story a little bit, from kindergarten through 10th grade, I was at what I think was the best school and what many others think was the best school in my local area. It was about, I think, less than 200 kids or around 200 kids for the entire school. So you were getting a lot of personalized attention from a teacher in all of your classes. And it was a classical school, so it focused on grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and kind of learning those liberal arts skills that are applicable throughout each subject and not just focusing in on one thing and not seeing how it applies to everything else. I definitely learned a lot there while I was there, but I found as I started to enter high school that it wasn't quite what I wanted, and it wasn't pushing me and helping me grow as much as it could. There was a lot of things that it was teaching me, but it wasn't I didn't feel like I was really being pushed to become better. I felt like I was sitting in a classroom for 7 hours and not really maximizing my time or learning valuable skills that would actually help me beyond high school. This is kind of a funny story. Since about January of my 10th grade year, I told my parents, and I was at the top of my class, and I say that not to brag, but it wasn't like I was struggling through the school. I was excelling there. I was getting all A's, doing really well. So when I told my parents that I did not want to go to school there the next year, they were very surprised. They were very confused. Over 6 months, I was able to convince them that a self-directed homeschool curriculum would be better than what the private school was offering me.
How'd it work out?
So for the past 2 years, I have been doing a curriculum that combines college courses, online high school courses, and self-directed study with things that normal high school kids don't get to experience. So I have gone with my dad to several conferences, including Tony Robbins' Unleash the Power Within, where I got to walk on fire and learn about like a bunch of different psychology things and about how kind of the human mind works and how we can perform better at everything that we do, which was really cool. So I kind of got to mix together. So I took like college math and all of that stuff so that I had a couple of college credits going into college, since college is expensive. I'm sure we'll get to that later. And I got to do some online learning. So I was still collaborating with peers and learning from teachers, but that self-directed aspect and the additional events I did with my dad really made it a more unique experience that I felt was better fitted to me, and that's pushed me to do more and to learn more than I would have if I was in a traditional school.
We'll dig into some of those different things. Before we do that, I'm going to hop back for half a second, and then we'll talk about college, and then we'll go forward. So one of the unique things you have is a Roth IRA. We funded that to show you the power of compounding over a lifetime. And as long as you've got earned income, and it doesn't matter how you earn your income, babysitting, anything else, you get to set money aside and allow it to grow tax-free. And a small amount today turns into a massive amount tomorrow. I don't know if you remember any of the math.
I do remember some of the math. I don't remember the specific math equation, but I do vividly remember the chart where as you look at the chart, like if you've got number of years on the x-axis and number of dollars on the y-axis, you see the number of dollars doesn't really increase. So if you start out with $1,000, as you're progressing throughout the years, it's slowly increasing, but not very much. And then all of a sudden, once you get to a certain point, the graph just shoots upwards. In the span of a year, the entire amount totally changes.
And so that's the magic of compound interest, and it goes with money as it does with kind of everything else in life. When you just keep showing up, doing the work, over time, things compound, and then one day the graph turns and things explode, and all of a sudden, life is amazing. So let's talk about college. College these days is kind of expensive.
Yeah, it's really expensive, far more than I ever thought it would be.
Very true. And I think I've learned a lot on this journey, but we have had a simple saying: if you want to go to college,
then you have to pay for it.
So how's that going?
Just to fill you in on a little bit of the background, since my dad didn't, when I started high school, he made it very clear to me, as both of my parents made it very clear to me, that if I was essentially smart enough to go to college and smart enough to want to do that, then I was smart enough to figure out how to pay for it. And since both of my parents paid their way through college, but it was a lot less expensive then because the dorms were not anywhere near as nice as they are now. There weren't as many experience-related things that went along with college. It was more of like an academic experience or like a sports experience. There weren't all of these like fancy additional extra things that colleges were using to try to like reel students in. So the cost has increased astronomically. When I was in 9th grade, I started kind of picking out the schools that I wanted to go to and figuring that out and starting conversations with them, figuring out what kind of scholarships they offered. I did not look at schools that were not going to offer me good merit scholarship aid. I started looking at additional scholarships as well, but over the past couple of years, I think things have increasingly just become harder and harder because I know that if I had graduated and was a rising college freshman 2 or 3 years ago, I think the scholarship aid was looking much better.
I think there's downward pressure that's going on in the college world. I don't know this for sure, but I think what's happening is kids are seeing the cost of college. They're starting to question the cost of college. And instead of going to the top premier schools, your better students are now pushing down into some schools that are less expensive, maybe not the top school, but considerably cheaper. And so competition is heating up for those scholarships. I don't know what they've done, but from what I'm seeing, instead of actually looking at the student, they're creating algorithms. And the algorithms are strictly based on SAT scores and your GPA. And so you at least maxed out on both of those algorithms. So you got max scholarships from the colleges for that.
Yes, from the 2 schools that I was looking at, I did max out the GPA and the SAT aid, but I had friends who did well in school, but they didn't really do much outside of school other than maybe sports, getting the same amount of scholarships that I did from certain schools just because of their GPA and their test score. So colleges are starting to look at, especially for just the scholarships part, even for the admissions part. I'm not sure about the admissions part at like Ivy League schools, but for the scholarships part at a lot of other schools, they're literally just looking at the numbers. The computer's deciding for them, this is how many scholarships we have to give. These are our top students based on GPA and SAT. So this is who we're going to give money to.
And so they do that because the higher their GPA and SAT scores, the more prestigious they get. They assume that the kids are going to do more and more. So it's kind of a game, and it's changing, and we'll see what happens. And we'll see where you end up and how much more money you can still get through scholarships over the next couple of months.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure how that's going to go at this point, but I can only imagine that for students that are currently freshmen in high school, sophomores in high school, that this is only going to get harder. If I had known what I know now, and I know my brother's definitely doing this, take more dual enrollment credits. So you can take college credits as a high school student, and the credits are significantly discounted. One of the schools that I applied to that's local, high school students can take college courses for $150 a credit. And I think you can take between 8 or 9 credits a semester. And then the local community college, you can take credits for $100 a credit, which is significantly cheaper than it would be if you were a college student. So if you can, especially with like math courses or English courses or other courses that you know are going to transfer, take them in high school because you'll get a discount, and then you can get out of college in 3.5, maybe even 2.5 years, so that that cost is cut down significantly.
Your college classes count towards your high school transcript. You get double credit for them.
A lot of public schools do offer it as an option, or they allow you to like schedule all of your classes in the morning. And then if you're able to drive, you can drive to a local college in the afternoon. If you're homeschooled, definitely easier. Private schools are where it might be a little bit trickier, but I know a lot of private schools, at least in my area, are starting to offer, especially their math courses, as dual enrolled college courses. Some colleges also accept AP tests, but I'm hearing that the transferability of those may be on their decline, especially with some of them, but I'm not positive about that.
Again, you have to be intentional. Look at your specific college of where you want to go, see what their fees are, see if it's a good match, see what they're willing to offer in the way of aid, and then make a decision of, is this worth it? Because if it's not worth it, don't go. Or maybe you go and you try for a year and you walk away, which is also an option.
I know a lot of my friends and other people that I know are kind of walking into it blindly, just assuming that it's something they have to do. And I've heard from a lot of young adults, so people that are in their 20s or early 30s that didn't go to college or that did an alternate option, that were very happy and are very pleased with where they are right now. So don't be afraid to explore other options besides college. I know that it can be tough to do that because there's a lot of like societal pressure to go to college instead of a trade school or like a gap year program or some kind of alternative thing. But I personally would never want to walk into a giant amount of debt just blindly and because other people are telling me I have to.
They're all pushing for it. They don't seem to have any problem saying, oh, just take out a loan.
Yeah, definitely. I continually hear that because I've gone back to the college that I would like to go to and I've asked them, hey, I'm okay getting a part-time job. I want to get a part-time job. If I get a part-time job and if I take out a small loan, so $5,000 a year, which I would end up with $20,000 after graduating, which is not ideal, but not bad in comparison to kids that have significantly more than that. But even with that, there is still $7,000 to make up, and they're telling me to take out another $7,000 loan. They're usually surprised when I tell them, okay, 7,000 times 4 years is 28,000 plus the 20,000 I already had. That's $48,000 after graduating from college in loans, which is a severe financial burden on someone that's just getting out of college, trying to find their footing in the world and get a job. I don't think that's fair or that's like a sane thing to do.
I think it depends. Your brother's going more into a STEM field. So for him to take out a $48,000 loan wouldn't be so bad because there's a good possibility that literally his starting salary could be double what yours is. He would have the ability to do that versus someone who had a business degree. And you've got to weigh what the payback is at the other end of the thing. And so those are choices that you have to look at.
That's definitely true as well. For certain people, like if you're going into medical school, it's going to be tougher to avoid those loans, like significantly tougher. But for a business degree, for a lot of other degrees, it may not be worth it.
That's the funny thing. A lot of people who go to medical school go to prestigious undergrad schools. And the reality of it is nobody cares where the doctor did their undergraduate. They care where the doctor did their medical school and their medical residency. So overpaying for the undergraduate degree isn't worth it. You get the cheapest undergraduate degree that you can get that will get you into the medical school you want to get into and go that route. And there are combined programs. There's a whole bunch of different ways through that. But again, it's better to be intentional than to graduate with, for those guys, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in debt, which is quite high.
Yeah, that's a lot, even if you are going to be a doctor or a surgeon. I know some of my friends that are also pursuing STEM fields that plan to go to graduate school are going to state schools or cheaper schools for undergrad because they know it doesn't matter as much as where they go for graduate school. Some of their local state schools have good internships available in that area with STEM companies that will then pay for their graduate school. So they're trying to figure out those opportunities and they're being intentional about it. And because of that, they're going to graduate with less debt and probably be in a better position when they graduate as well.
You had a lot of freedom in high school, which allowed you to do a lot of things and allowed you to interact not with people your age, but with adults. And you've had a lot of different situations like that. So we'll kind of chat through a bunch of those. I think the first thing, if I remember, that you ever did was go to an RBT meetup. An RBT was an online group started by Ramit Shetty. People just created these meetups where people who kind of felt part of the tribe would get together and talk about a variety of different topics, all of them kind of around the idea of making yourself better. So we went to a couple of those. How was that experience? Like, I think you were about 13 when you walked into one of those. So you're walking in as a 13-year-old young girl, and you're in a room full of people that probably are mid-20s up until maybe 50. Majority of them were in their late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah, I was probably I think I was in 8th grade for sure, so probably about 12 or 13. I'm not exactly sure what age that would be. I do remember walking into a couple of those, especially the first one, and being just completely unsure of what to expect. Because of where we're located, we're kind of close to major cities, but like we had to drive down to DC, I think, for the first one. So we were sitting in the car for 2.5, 3 hours. And I remember you telling me on the car ride down, just like asking me like what I was expecting and kind of the questions I might want to ask and how we'd had that conversation. So although I wasn't sure what to expect, I had a couple of questions in mind going in. I wanted to ask people, what was the one thing you wish you did differently when you were entering high school? Because that was I was in the transition point between middle school and high school. What was one of the things that you wish you had done when you were entering college? So I just asked a lot of people about their experiences, about their stories, about things that they wish they had known, about things that they've learned, how they got from where they were in 9th grade to where they are now at the end of their 20s. And I learned from a variety of different people in all sorts of different fields. Everybody was just willing to share these amazing stories. And so I got to have a bunch of conversations with people that I wouldn't have otherwise met.
Do you remember any of the particular things that stood out in your mind that you said, I'm going to make a change because now I know how to avoid a pitfall or how to achieve success easier?
That's a tough question. There was a lot of... I spoke to a lot of different people about a variety of different things. A lot of them said, don't be afraid to try something and fail. So if I were to ask the question, what was one thing you wish you did differently? A lot of people said, I wouldn't do anything differently because then I wouldn't be where I am today. So they appreciated both the successes and the failures. And they said that a lot of people don't try something because they're afraid to start and fail. They just encouraged me not to shy away from that. So even if I wasn't totally sure like what field I wanted to study, what I eventually wanted to go into for a career, all of those different things. They said, don't be afraid to try something, have it not work out, and then change your mind later because you will learn from the experience. Just having that mindset as you go into an experience, this may or may not work out, but regardless of the outcome, I'm going to learn something and I'm going to improve based on what happens here.
That's very true. So one of the other things we were kind of intentional with was I forced you to email people who were successful and said, just try it. And I don't remember how you got. Did you read a book on Seth Godin before we went to the lecture? There must have been something there that prompted you to be interested.
Yes. So I read my first book that I had read by Seth Godin, like one of the first books that I'd kind of read that wasn't just like your typical teenage fiction or like classic literature, was Stop Stealing Dreams by Seth Godin. If you remember earlier, I had mentioned a couple of events that I'd gotten to go to since I was homeschooled in junior and senior year. But before that, in 8th and 9th grade, there were events that my parents took me to. And because I had like been successful at those events, it kind of laid the groundwork for me to do well later on. But there was a catch to getting to go see all of these wonderful people speak and meet all these great people. So before we went to this event where Seth Godin was talking about his newest book, which at the time was What to Do When It's Your Turn, I think is the one that it was.
And it's always your turn.
Yeah, that's the second part of the title. Before we went to this event, my dad required me to email him, to send him an email and say, hey, I loved your book about education. I learned these 3 things. I'm looking forward to hearing you speak. It was a very basic email. It was probably only like 5 sentences in total. It was very short. But at the time, I didn't quite understand why I had to send it. I didn't think that I would get a response. I was just really confused at the whole situation, but I did it anyways.
And what happened?
What happened was, as soon as he was done speaking, he was standing in line. Well, he wasn't standing in line. We were standing in line to get our book signed. He was like at a table. We had gotten there quickly because we knew that there was going to be a very long line out the door very shortly. As soon as I walked up and I introduced myself, he said, oh, you play volleyball. And I just kind of stood there for a second looking at him really confused because how could he have possibly known that? And I'm pretty sure he caught on to the fact that I was confused after a couple of seconds because I was just kind of like, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, you're the girl who emailed me. And I guess the only way that he would have known that I had played volleyball is if he'd Googled me. And I guess since I played for a Christian school, like a small Christian school, my results were up on some website, or just like the fact that I had played, and I'm assuming it showed on Google.
It did. So he did respond to your email, though, before the event, too.
Yes, he did. He just said something along the lines of, thanks for reaching out, looking forward to meeting you.
And then after the event, so that, I think, the important lesson here, I think that you learned was keep your Google profile clean.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I am, as far as I know, I am the only person with my first and last name. So a lot of my friends are very confused because I'm very particular about keeping my social media accounts private and being very conscious of what I post. And a lot of friends whose names are similar to John Smith can post whatever they want because there are thousands of John Smiths in the world. But yeah, definitely be mindful of what you post. I know that if you Google Rocky Lalvani, he has claimed the first 5 pages of Google. And I know this because we were having a family argument. And I did, in fact, check all 5 pages. All the first 5 pages of Google. Every single one of them is him. All of them are him being featured on like blogs, podcasts, being quoted on all of these amazing places. So yeah, definitely be mindful of what you put out on the internet because people do see it.
And during that lecture, you learned a lesson. What was the lesson you learned from Seth during that lecture?
The hand-raising thing. Oh, okay. So he asked us to do an exercise. Basically, he said, raise your left hand as high as you can. And all of the audience raised their left hand most of the way up, just kind of there. And he said, okay, now raise it higher. And everybody raised their hand higher. He paused for a second and looked out in the audience, just kind of gave us a second to think. And then he said, at first I told you to raise your hand as high as you can. And yet when I told you to raise it higher, you could still raise it higher. At this point, he was talking about like the education system and how we've learned from a very young age, don't give your best first because people are always going to ask more of you. So it was just interesting to see that visual of everybody after being told essentially to do their best, not do their best, and then do better once prompted.
And you've been to a couple other events and continued the conversation with him. So that's been kind of cool. And it's opened up you to reading more books that he has. He's pretty much of a marketing guy. At the end of the day, everything is about sales. So we should also learn how to sell and how to market ourselves and how to create those tribes. Actually, it helped you in your college application, didn't it?
It did. So one of the scholarship applications that I had to do for the school that I was looking at, I had to write a paper and give a speech on a place or an institution that I would like to intern with if I were in New York City, which is where the college is located. I wrote about Seth Godin, and I said that I would love, he accepts interns for certain projects. So you're essentially actually doing meaningful work and learning skills that are applicable throughout everything. So I kind of talked a little bit about that, which was a more unique choice than a lot of the other peers who presented.
Makes you a little bit pointy. Colleges are looking for pointy kids, not well-rounded kids. They want kids who can stick out and show something a little bit different.
Yeah, that's definitely true and something that I've noticed. I have a lot of friends I participate in FTC Robotics, so under first. I have a lot of friends who participate in the same program who are essentially all of the same kinds of people, but they're all really successful. But at the same point, a lot of Ivy League and top tier colleges, they got waitlisted or rejected just because there are so many other kids that are submitting the exact same thing for their application. They're saying, I was the team captain of my high school robotics team. I learned so much about STEM. I have a decent GPA, a really good SAT. Essentially, when you're applying to colleges, you have to figure out how to stand out somehow because there are so many other kids applying for the exact same spots in a selective college or the exact same selective scholarships as you are. And you'd be surprised at how similar a lot of the applicants are.
That's very true. So you've got to figure out how to stand out and how to stand out in a way that the college you're applying to is looking for. You've got to stand out in the way that they want kids to stand out. And so finding that proper fit so that it's a good intersection of what they're looking for with your skill sets and what you bring to the table. So you've also had to email some other people and ask them for stuff. I think one of those people was Penelope Trunk.
Yes. So Penelope Trunk is a blogger and an entrepreneur. She runs personality type courses through, I think it's Quistic. She's got a bunch of different courses up on there for Myers-Briggs personality types, and I think they're all centered and focused around that. When she announced that she was releasing, well, actually, at first, what she announced was that she was releasing a course that was my dad's personality type. So he took that course, and then the next course she did was the one for my personality type, and I think the course was a couple $100, which, as a 15, 16-year-old, I was not quite ready to spend a couple of $100 on an online 4-day course, as I'm sure you could guess. So I asked my parents for it. I said, hey, this course is going to help me become a better person. I'm going to learn so many things. And I tried to sell them on that side. And they said, okay, well, here's the deal. We're not paying for the course. You're going to have to work for it somehow. So their solution was that I would write an email to Penelope, the person that was running this course, and ask her if there was anything that I could help her with in exchange for this course. I mean, they helped me write the email, but I kind of had to figure out what I was going to include in that email and all of that other stuff.
And what happened?
What happened was that she sent an angry response back to my dad. What happened was she was, I can't believe you won't pay for something for your kid, because the way the email was phrased was like, hey, I really want to take this course. My parents won't pay for it. I don't have money. I'm trying to figure something out. What can I do for you? Is there anything I can do for you? And she just sent a little bit of a rant back to my father about how parents are supposed to love and nurture their children instead of telling them to figure out their entire lives at the age of 15 or 16 years old. But after that, She eventually gave me the course, and I helped her coordinate her Facebook groups since she's not super big on technology. So I helped her set those up and manage them and all of that stuff. I ended up writing a blog post for her on how students could do better on their SATs.
And so you built a relationship little by little. It's about constantly giving. And when you do that, you can connect with high-level people and get things back. You know, the more you help people, the more they help you. And I think it's just a lesson that don't not try, just go for it. What's the worst that happens? They say no. That puts you right back where you started anyway. So you've been to other events as well. You mentioned Tony Robbins earlier. Why don't we kind of talk a little bit about that? Again, you had to work for Tony Robbins, didn't you?
Are you just talking about the application part of it?
Well, how you got into it. So you didn't buy a ticket.
No, I did not buy a ticket to Tony Robbins. His Unleash the Power Within events, they are huge events. The one that we went to, I think, was in a stadium for like 10 to 12,000 people. My parents had both bought tickets. They figured that out ahead of time, and then they sent me an application for students. So basically, he has a youth foundation, and there were spots for maybe like 20 students or 30 students or something like that who applied to go at a significantly reduced price. Like, you were basically just paying for meals and maybe a little bit of supervision. But it was a pretty extensive application process. I had to write a decent amount of 2-paragraph responses to a couple of things. There was a phone interview involved. It was pretty extensive. I did have to work for that a little bit, and I was very nervous about the phone interview, as I do not like phone calls. My parents originally sent me the application. I was reading through the requirements, and I was like, okay, I can manage this. I can write those paragraphs up. I can submit my GPA and all of that stuff. And then the last thing was phone interview. I think my parents argued with me for a week to convince me that a phone interview was not going to be bad. Eventually, I was accepted into that program, and I was able to go through it surrounded by 20 other kids who were my age, so from like 13 to 18 instead of adults. So that was a nice change, being at one of those events with peers instead of people that were much older.
And where were the kids from that you were with?
I was expecting all across the country, but they were actually from all over the world. There were 2 from Tanzania or something. There was someone from South America. Most of the kids in that group, I would actually probably say about half of the kids in the group, well, maybe like a third to half, spoke a second language, or English was not their first language.
So why diversity of people? And I know you didn't like the forms that you had to sign beforehand.
Oh, yes. Tony does this thing called a fire walk. So basically, they heat up a bunch of hot coals and they lay them out on the ground and you walk across them barefoot. I had heard about this legendary fire walk. Like, my dad Googled it to try to prove that it was like legitimate to me. So like, I see a picture of Oprah walking across these hot coals and I was still skeptical that it was. And of course, my hesitation only increased when I saw that I had to sign not 1, not 2, but 3 waivers that if I got severely burned or ended up hospitalized, or that if there was any sort of injury to me as a person, that I was not going to hold them liable. So I was very concerned about that. I originally walked into the event, since you could opt out of the fire walk, because obviously you can't exactly force 10,000 people to walk across a bunch of burning hot coals, that I was not going to, I was just going to opt out of that part of the program. I was not going to do it. I was going to watch everybody else do it, and that was going to be good enough for me. This was at the end of the first day, so it was probably about 1 a.m. by the time we were finishing up and getting ready to walk across these coals, and I did end up doing it. Not because of peer pressure, but because I wanted to, and that was very surprising.
What else did you learn at that event?
At that event, I learned, honestly, that everybody is capable than significantly more than they think possible. Tony essentially starts these events at maybe 9 a.m. in the morning, and you're there till probably at least 11 p.m., if not midnight, if not 1, if not 2. If you decide to stay till the very end. I think the latest we were there was probably about 1:30. But he has you going all day. There are no scheduled breaks. He breaks whenever he feels like it. You're going through a bunch of exercises. You're sitting in your seat a lot of the time, but they also have you up and moving loud music, all of these things. A lot of things that I don't like. I don't like moving. I don't like loud music. I don't like sitting in the same place for 12 hours at a time. I don't like being somewhere past 10 p.m. I don't like walking across giant beds of burning hot coals. Yet I realized that I was actually capable of doing a lot more than I thought I was capable of. Seeing the people around me, I know that that was not something that was unique to me. That was something that everybody learned.
And it's great that you learned it at a young age. We also went to something that was similar but different. We just got back from Brendan Burchard's High Performance Academy. And they're somewhat similar, but they're different. What was your take on that event?
That event was definitely much milder in comparison to the UPW event that Tony did, because there were nice scheduled breaks. It starts at 9 a.m. in the morning and you will be done by 7 p.m. and you have a 2-hour lunch break. Like, that was phenomenal. I was not expecting that. Brendan's event, High Performance Academy, was a little bit more technical. So Tony focused more on kind of showing you what you were actually capable of. So motivational in a sense, like he would walk through the audience and like a couple of people would raise their hand to be called on and he would just coach them through the problem that they were having at that time. So he was very focused on the individual and the basic human needs, like what we need to survive, what we need to thrive, those kinds of things. Brendan's event was specifically geared to people who were kind of doing things but wanted to take whatever they were doing to the next level, hence High Performance Academy. So he gave a lot more technical tips about what people want, how to better persuade people, how to better schedule your time. Especially, he talked a lot about blocking out your time on a calendar and being intentional in planning things. He just gave a lot more systems and tangible lists and things like that that people could use to implement better habits in their own lives and help other people implement better habits in their lives as well.
I got a very similar takeaway as well. And we have the course. I'm still working through it. You can go through it as well when you finish the other one from Seth Godin and the other one on money. And
there's a lot of courses, quite a few courses.
Eventually, you have the whole summer before you're off to college to get it all done. So you also joined a local young professionals group, which gave you access to young people who finished college, who are kind of out in the working world. That also afforded you another opportunity. So was there anything that you learned from chatting with some of the other young professionals? And then what was the opportunity that came about from that?
Just very briefly, one of the things that I learned from just chatting with other young professionals, most of these people were early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, maybe early 30s. So these were people that were just getting out of college, just getting a job, and just trying to figure this stuff out. One of the things that I learned is that a lot of those people regret playing sports in high school. They regret spending their time on things that weren't helping them grow as people and like setting them up for success later on. And that's not to say that you can't do anything fun while you're in high school or that like you shouldn't have any fun ever because you're always preparing for the future. But one of the things that they did highlight was that they felt that they did a lot of things just because society told them it was what they were supposed to do, especially with sports or with how they spent their time on extracurricular activities. And they wish that they had thought a little bit more about how they were spending their time as a young person. Through that program, you could apply for a different program, which was called the Emerging Philanthropist Program. In that program, basically what we did was we got to learn from a bunch of people who write grants, who review grants, who give back to their community, all sorts of stuff surrounding the idea of giving back to your community and how you can best do that.
Tell us a little bit about the group you were with. What kind of people were you working with for that?
It was a variety of people, like all different ages, so mid-20s to probably mid-40s. People who, at whatever stage they were at, were interested in becoming a better person by being more involved with their community and giving back more. All of those people were in a variety of different fields, whether it be like a technical one, the medical field, the business world. Like, it wasn't just people who were involved with nonprofits.
And that was a year-long program, so you were constantly going month after month to these meetings. How were you received by the adults? This
was probably the place where I felt the least welcomed by adults, actually. just because they were very confused as to how a high schooler could be going through the same program that they were going through. When you meet people at other events focused on like self-development, like the Tony Robbins event, High Performance Academy, like all of those, I think the adults are a little bit more welcoming and a little bit more open to kids who are outside of the norm. This group, while they eventually became welcoming, at first seemed a little bit more confused that I was there. I guess maybe because they didn't think that I would be able to do the program, or just they figured that I had gotten there because like my parents figured out something. I'm not exactly sure what they were thinking, but this was definitely one of the places where I felt like the adults weren't immediately just like welcoming me, I guess.
But over time, how did it go?
Over time, I did make friends with a few of the younger adults throughout the course of the program. A couple of adults dropped out because they ended up moving or something else ended up happening. But for those of us who stayed, I think there was maybe 15 of us, I became friends with 4 or 5 people, and I no longer felt like I was out of place.
Eventually you fit in. These are all adult-focused things, but you also had fun, right? You did some kid-focused things. One of those was Girl Scouts. And through Girl Scouts, you earned your Gold Award. And you did a project. What did you learn? Actually, you should probably tell the story of how that all started and kind of what you learned from your project.
Contrary to popular belief, Girl Scouts is not just for elementary school girls trying to sell cookies. I know the Boy Scout Eagle Scout Award is much more popular in that like people expect you to be a Boy Scout from like when you're little up until like your high school time, and then you end up earning like your Eagle Scout Award and a bunch of merit badges. Girl Scouts actually has a very similar thing. It's just not anywhere near as popular. That's what the Gold Award is. It's a service project that you earn sometime while you're in high school. It has to be led and directed by the Girl Scout who's doing it. It's not something that an adult creates. Essentially, the girl has to be organizing and leading the service project. While planting a bunch of trees at a retirement home used to be acceptable, they're kind of starting to move away from that, just because it's supposed to be a sustainable project that involves other people from the community. My project was working with a local university and the Girl Scouts Council that was close to me to organize a STEM day, so science, technology, engineering, and math, for middle school girls. Basically, over the course of a year, I met with people at the Girl Scouts, I met with people at the college, I met with college students, I met with people from local businesses in the area, some of the engineering and tech companies, and brought people who were probably 30, maybe even 40 years older than I was, into several rooms with several meetings where I was the one leading those meetings, being in charge, figuring out what the next steps were, and making this day possible. Then last spring, the day did happen at the university, and there were probably about 100 middle school Girl Scouts that attended, going through 9 different science and technology stations. So they got to learn about a wide variety of different concepts.
And what was the feedback received?
The feedback received, which is not just me making things up, like someone actually wrote a wonderful blog post about the day, was that this was one of the most organized and most impactful events. The girls felt that they were actually learning something. It wasn't too academic, but they did feel that while they were having fun, they were learning skills and not just kind of being given like a watered down version of something. So the girls felt that they were actually being exposed to amazing new ideas, that they weren't like, it wasn't a shallow experience for them.
I think, unfortunately, a lot of times that what kids get when an adult creates the program, it comes from an adult perspective. When a kid creates a program, it comes from a very different perspective. What do you think you learned from that whole event?
I know that one of the things that is popular right now is the difference between genders in the workplace or in any of those sort of meeting rooms. Guys do have a tendency to talk a lot more than women do. Like that is a fact that I experience. It's not something that people are saying because they're sexist or because they're trying to make things up. It's actually because guys just have a tendency to talk more than women do. Whenever I was sitting around a table with both women and men, the men were a lot more likely to dominate the conversation, to talk over each other, to push for their idea. At a couple of the meetings, I was surrounded by college professors, professionals, and college students who were all male. And I was supposed to be leading this meeting. So I'm sitting at a conference table, at the head of the conference table, with a bunch of guys who are arguing about their ideas. I really had to learn confidence and asserting an idea and not being afraid to push for what I thought was going to be the most beneficial course of action. And just being confident in myself and what I had to say and being able to say that in a group of people that was also trying to do the same thing.
And we'll link to the video. You can see the project.
Oh, boy.
You also went to a Future Entrepreneurs Week. That was high school kid focused, week-long summer camp. What was that all about?
It was for high school students who were interested in like entrepreneurial endeavors or business. We kind of got to go through like this simulation where we were running our own business. We had to figure out the numbers, like how much money we wanted to spend on all of these things, whether we wanted to produce more products at a lower cost or less products at a higher cost, how much money we wanted to spend on marketing and advertising. The simulation was one part of the week, and then the rest of the week was split up into two. So there was a marketing part. So we had to sell an item. My group was skateboards. The marketing group was figuring out a bunch of posters and presentation and taglines and logos and all of that stuff for how we could advertise and market our skateboard company. The other half of it was those of us who were actually putting together a financial plan, what we planned to do, how we planned to grow the business, whether we were a premium product or a product for the everyday person. There was a lot of different skills involved, and we worked on teams of like 15 to 20 people. Everybody kind of had to be really pushing forward, putting a bunch of effort, time, and thought into whatever part of the project they were working on.
And you also went away, I forgot, for a teen entrepreneur weekend as well. You got to make connections there.
Yes. So there was a young girl who, I think early 20s, who I met at a different conference that we went to, FinCon. She started a group for teenagers who were interested in entrepreneurial stuff, and she held a 3-day conference. We did get to go to that. That was an interesting experience, like seeing other kids who were also interested in maybe starting a business or freelancing or just things that a lot of kids today forget are kind of an option, or they just don't know about it. Like they assume they have to go work in an office or they're not going to be successful. It was interesting to hear from other students and the speakers that were there about ways that teens can get involved in entrepreneurial stuff now and in the future.
That was a fun weekend. And I think the last big thing that you probably do as a high school student is robotics. And we've talked a little bit about that and your role. What have you kind of learned from being part of a robotics team when you're not really a STEM kid?
Funny story. The way I ended up on the robotics team was as an 8th grader at the time, while I was still at the small school that I was at. A couple of guys who were rising seniors came to me and asked me, hey, you're doing like reasonably well in school. We've seen you work on a bunch of other things, and we think that you should join our robotics team. I kind of thought they were a little bit crazy because math was my least favorite class. I hated anything related to anything technical, anything science. And you're probably thinking that that's really weird after I just told the story about how I organized a day for young girls to learn more about these things. But at that time, I was totally not into anything STEM related, and I didn't think that I ever would be because I just assumed that wasn't my skill set. So it took them a while to convince me, but eventually they convinced me to join their team for a year. It was about half an hour to 40 minutes away from my house. And at this point, I couldn't drive, and neither could any of the other students that were participating from the school. So the parents were not very happy about that long carpool commute. So they were thankful that this was only for a year. After a year, we would go back with the knowledge that we had learned from that robotics team and start one at the school that I was at. I did this along with my younger brother and 2 other students from the school. That was a huge learning experience for me, being able to be on a team with people that were technical and seeing that not all of them started out that way, and how much they had learned through the program and how much I could learn through the program, even though I was walking in with not very much knowledge. And I learned that even though it was a robotics program, there were so many other things that had to happen behind the scenes. There was fundraising, since all of the parts for that robot are really expensive. There was social media stuff that had to get done to like recruit sponsors and to get more people from our community involved. There were outreach events into our community to get more younger students involved, like the project I did. We did a bunch of other smaller events where we just kind of talked a little bit about robotics and got more kids interested in STEM. There were a million other things besides just the technical part to running this robotics team.
How much did you raise over the last couple of years for the team?
I think we're at just over 30,000 is the number I want to go for.
Which is quite considerable for a small little robotics team to go out and learn how to do that. And that's why learning the skill of sales and marketing, being able to connect with adults, tell a story, it works and it helps you to get ahead.
Yeah, just as an FYI, most of the time the coaches are supposed to do the fundraising, and the coach is my father, of course. And for those of you that listen to this podcast regularly, I'm sure that you know that he did not let me take the easy way out. He did not want to do this fundraising, so...
I opened all the doors for you. I just made it look easy for you.
No, so yeah, I was significantly involved with writing the grants and really understanding how that whole process of building the relationship with companies or with other people that we wanted to donate, writing those materials, asking for donations. So that was another skill that came from that program.
You have to do the stuff to learn it. If your parents keep doing it, you're going to be wonderful kids, but then you're going to be living in my basement. And that's not what I want.
I can assure you that neither of your children are going to be living in your basement because your basement is freezing.
That's good. It keeps them out. So what advice do you have for parents for how they should talk to their kids and motivate their kids? How do you create a great relationship with your teenager?
That's an insanely tough question because it's definitely different for every teenager. So for parents that may have a lot of kids or even just two kids, those two kids can be radically different. And what's going to motivate them and the kinds of things that they need throughout high school are going to be radically different because they're radically different people. I've seen a lot of my peers who maybe even only have one sibling, one younger sibling or one older sibling. Like they're the complete opposite of their sibling, and yet the parents treat them the same way. They give them the same opportunities. They expect them to act the same way. They expect them to be good at the same things. For parents with multiple teenagers or just kids of all ages, definitely don't expect that your two kids are going to be exactly the same. They're going to be unique and different, and they're going to need different things, different encouragement, and different opportunities from you throughout the course of their adolescent lives.
What's one thing we've done well?
I would definitely say respect is one thing that I definitely feel like I've gotten from both of my parents, which I don't see a lot of my peers receiving. When I was younger, my parents were very strict about the TV we watched and all of that stuff. Like they had a lot of little rules as we were like when we were younger that a lot of other parents didn't have. Like I have never seen SpongeBob. I have never seen High School Musical. Like I've watched a lot of those, some of the stuff now that I wasn't allowed to watch when I was younger. But since my parents were stricter with me when I was younger, when I was older, they were able to give me a lot more freedom and trust me a lot more than some of my peers. And they eventually like did loosen up. Like they weren't strict all the way through high school. I know that kids with the strictest parents are often the craziest ones because they have to figure out they're the best people at sneaking out at doing things they're not supposed to do because their parents are so strict and don't give them any freedom. I never felt like my parents were teaming up against me or trying to make me lose things that I wanted or anything like that. And I saw a lot of my peers being frustrated with their parents because they didn't understand why their parents were treating them the way that they were. And they felt like their parents were treating them as teenagers like adults with the responsibilities they had. So they're like, take out the trash, clean your room, get good grades, start being responsible. Yet the parents weren't trusting them to have their own car, to drive their own car, to do certain things with friends. They just didn't trust their kid to actually be responsible and then were expecting their kid to be responsible. I think that that's something that I see with a lot of parents that you haven't really done.
Thank you. And I know we've let you kind of have freedom to go roam the streets of New York City on your own. You know, we've handed you credit cards to use wisely so that you can go buy us groceries and things when we need them. So it makes it easier. But you're learning how those processes take place. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that we should have covered today?
We've talked about a lot of things. I don't know if there's much more we could cover.
So as we wrap up, any additional advice for parents and how they should communicate with their kids?
I think, again, I'm restating what I said earlier, but the biggest thing is that no two kids are going to be the same. And you can't treat them the same, and you can't expect them to be the same. I know my brother and I are radically different. We are complete opposites. If my parents had treated us the same way, neither of us would be successful in what we're doing right now. So definitely just be mindful that both of your kids don't have to be the same, and that partially your kid's personality is their own and was going to be that way regardless of what you did. So if your kid is wildly successful, or if your kid is a miserable failure, which I hope you don't think that of your child, but in the event that you do, some of that is not your fault or your doing. Kids are born a certain kind of way, and especially if you have two kids that are radically different, don't be too hard on yourself if you're afraid that you did something horribly wrong, or don't think that it was only you, I guess, that made your kid super successful.
That's cool. I think that's some great advice. And, I think parents should have intentional, open conversations with their kids and discuss what it is they want, and actually take the time to listen and come up with plans and help them build the life so that they can launch and go do great things. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I have to say, I'm really not thrilled with the cost of college and the value it provides. The students make the college doesn't make the kid most often. While we did get a substantial scholarship award, we did not get as much money as we hoped for. We've changed our focus with my son, and he's going to spend the last 2 years of high school focused on earning as many college credits as he can. This will cut down on the number of years he has to pay a high tuition. There is an abundance of resources to learn from. You should check out some of them. One that I'm going to recommend is a podcast called Financial Mentor, and it's episode 24, How to Pay for College When You Don't Qualify for Financial Aid. I'll put a link in the show notes. There are also a ton of different links to the different subjects that we talked about today in the show notes, and links to the programs that she was involved with. Take the time to be intentional with your kids. Have great conversations with your kids about life, and teach them by walking the walk, not just through words alone. Today's action step: listen to your kids, have a conversation, and make them feel listened to. It doesn't mean you have to do what they want, but at least have a reasonable conversation. It's harder to keep wealth than it is to make it. Once you come up with a system to create wealth, you need a system to keep it. If you'd like a second opinion on your financial plans, or are worried that you're missing out on something, check out the SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats at richersoul.com/SWOT. Is there someone you know who could benefit from what we talked about today? Please share it, as it helps you build social capital and create better relationships and start better conversations with the people you know, and they'll appreciate you for it. What's preventing you from moving forward? And who are you putting on your team to help you build the life you deserve? Taking no action creates a far worse outcome in life than trying something and failing. Can I help you achieve your goals? Just email me, and we can start a conversation with a short chat to see if we're a good fit. You can reach me at rocky@richersoul.com, and I'd love to hear how you're doing and how the information I've shared has helped you. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.